He laughed, a cruel, echoing sound in the quiet restaurant. "Let's be real, Chloe. You're too big for me." Before the tears could even sting my eyes, a shadow materialized. A sickening crunch shattered the silence, followed by a dark, lethal whisper. "She is perfect, and you are finished." The reservation at Laura Chicago's most notoriously exclusive dining room had taken 3 months to secure. For Chloe Adams, a 28-year-old art restorer who spent her days covered in turpentine and dust tonight, was supposed to be a triumph. She had spent a small fortune on a custom-tailored emerald green silk dress by Christian Siriano. It draped over her thick thighs, hugged her wide hips, and cinched at her waist. For the first time in a long time, Chloe looked in the mirror and felt undeniably fiercely beautiful. She was a plus-size woman in a world that demanded shrinking, but tonight she dared to take up space. Her date was Bradley Hastings, a 32-year-old vice president at a downtown logistics firm. They had met on a dating app 3 weeks prior. His messages had been charming, full of witty banter and promises of sweeping her off her feet. But from the moment Bradley sat down across from her in the dimly lit, velvet-lined booth, the atmosphere curdled. He didn't look at her eyes. His gaze swept over her body, and a subtle, unmistakable sneer twisted his lips. It was the look Chloe had endured her entire life, the silent, judgmental calculus of a man weighing her worth against a societal standard she never asked to meet. "So," Bradley said, swirling his $400 glass of Barolo, not bothering to hide his disappointment. "Your profile pictures. They were creatively angled, weren't they?" Chloe's heart plummeted, hitting her stomach like a lead weight. "Excuse me," she asked, her voice trembling just a fraction. "Look, let's not play games." Bradley sighed, leaning back and crossing his arms. He flagged down a waiter without looking at him. "I'll have the Wagyu ribeye, and for the lady just the house salad. Vinaigrette on the side." "I haven't decided what I want," Chloe interrupted, her cheeks burning with a mixture of humiliation and rising anger. Bradley chuckled, leaning in close. "I'm doing you a favor, Chloe. I'm a guy who values fitness, health, discipline. It's obvious you lack all 3. Honestly, I thought you'd have a prettier face to make up for the rest of it. Let's be real, Chloe. You're too big for me. I'm embarrassed to be seen with you." The words were a physical blow. The ambient hum of the restaurant faded into a high-pitched ringing in Chloe's ears. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white, fighting the sudden, overwhelming urge to cry. All the confidence she had built, all the self-love she had cultivated, was unraveling in the face of this arrogant stranger's cruelty. She started to push her chair back. "I'm leaving?" "Good," Bradley muttered, taking a sip of his wine. "You can pay for the valet." Before Chloe could stand, a sudden drop in the room's temperature seemed to freeze the air itself. The chatter around them died instantly. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over Laura. A man stepped out of the shadows of the VIP alcove. He moved with the terrifying, silent grace of an apex predator. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in an immaculate charcoal Tom Ford suit that looked tailored to conceal the raw violence humming beneath the fabric. His face was a masterpiece of harsh angles and cold authority framed by dark, swept-back hair. A faint silvery scar jagged across his left jawline. This was Lorenzo Romano. To the society pages, he was a reclusive real estate mogul. To the Chicago underworld, he was the don of the Romano Syndicate, a man who ruled the city's dark arteries with an iron, blood-stained fist. Lorenzo didn't look at Chloe. His pitch-black eyes were locked entirely on Bradley, radiating a murderous intent so pure it made Chloe stop breathing. "Excuse me, pal. We're having a private conversation." Bradley snapped, oblivious to the fact that every waiter and patron in the vicinity had suddenly frozen in sheer terror. Lorenzo's hand shot out with the speed of a striking viper. He didn't grab Bradley's collar. He clamped his large, calloused hand directly over the lower half of Bradley's face. The sickening, wet crunch of bone snapping echoed like a gunshot in the silent restaurant. Bradley let out a muffled, gurgling shriek, his eyes rolling back in agony as his jaw was violently dislocated and fractured under the crushing pressure of Lorenzo's grip. Blood spilled from Bradley's lips, staining his crisp white collar. Lorenzo shoved the whimpering man backward, sending him crashing out of his chair and onto the imported Persian rug. Lorenzo pulled a monogrammed silk handkerchief from his pocket, methodically wiping a single drop of Bradley's blood from his knuckles. He looked down at the writhing man with absolute disgust. "She is perfect." Lorenzo's voice was a low, guttural rasp that commanded the room. "And you are finished. If I ever see your face in my city again, I won't just break your jaw, I will take your head." He tossed the bloody handkerchief onto Bradley's chest. Then Lorenzo turned his gaze to Chloe. The homicidal coldness in his eyes vanished, replaced instantly by a burning, intense reverence that pinned her to her seat. He extended a large, scarred hand toward her. "Miss Adams," Lorenzo said softly, the Italian cadence in his voice wrapping around her name like velvet. "This trash is no longer fit for your company. Please, allow me to take you out of here." Chloe stared at the hand, then at the man bleeding on the floor, and finally into Lorenzo's mesmerizing, dangerous eyes. Logic screamed at her to run, but something deeper, an undeniable magnetic pull, made her lift her trembling hand and place it into his. His grip was warm, solid, and incredibly gentle. "My car is waiting," he murmured, leading her out of the stunned restaurant, as if they were the only two people in the world. The night air of Chicago whipped against Chloe's flushed cheeks as she was guided toward the curb. A matte black custom-armored Maybach idled at the entrance. The driver, a heavily muscled man with an earpiece, scrambled to open the rear door, bowing his head respectfully as Lorenzo approached. Chloe slid into the plush leather interior, her mind spinning in a chaotic vortex. Who was this man? How did he know her name? And why had he just committed a brutal assault on her behalf in the middle of a Michelin-starred restaurant? Lorenzo slid in beside her, the scent of bergamot, expensive leather, and a faint metallic trace of gunpowder filling the cabin. The partition went up silently, sealing them in an intimate, soundproof cocoon. "Breathe, Chloe," Lorenzo instructed his tone, soothing, contrasting wildly with the violence she had just witnessed. He reached over, pouring a glass of amber liquid from a crystal decanter in the console. "Drink this. It will steady your nerves." She took the glass with shaking hands, the bite of the aged bourbon grounding her. "Who are you?" she finally managed to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. "How do you know my name?" Lorenzo didn't answer immediately. He studied her in the dim streetlights, flashing through the tinted windows. His gaze was heavy, tactile, mapping the curves of her face, the swell of her chest beneath the green silk, the soft, full shape of her body. There was no judgment in his eyes, no calculation, only raw, unfiltered hunger and deep admiration. "My name is Lorenzo Romano," he said quietly. Chloe gasped, nearly dropping her glass. Even sheltered in the art world, she knew that name. Everyone in Chicago knew that name. It was whispered in fear. The Romanos controlled the docks, the unions, and half the politicians in the state. You're the Mafia," she stammered, pressing herself against the door. "I am a businessman who protects what is his," Lorenzo corrected smoothly. "And as for how I know your name, I have known your name for exactly 6 months. ever since you were commissioned by the Galletti Gallery to restore a 19th century portrait. Chloe's eyes widened. The portrait of Isabella, the woman in the mourning veil. My mother, Lorenzo said, his voice tightening. It was badly damaged in a fire decades ago. I watched you work on it. The gallery has cameras. I watched you for hours, Chloe. The gentleness in your hands, the way you hummed when you mixed your pigments, the way you look. He shifted closer, closing the distance between them. I was captivated, obsessed. You've been stalking me, Chloe asked, anger momentarily eclipsing her fear. And tonight, what you just happened to be at the same restaurant. I own Laura, Lorenzo replied smoothly, and I didn't stalk you tonight. I was protecting you. Bradley Hastings wasn't just a bad date, Mia Cara. Lorenzo pulled a sleek tablet from the console and tapped the screen, holding it up for her to see. It displayed financial records, gambling debts, and surveillance photos of Bradley meeting with dangerous-looking men in cheap tracksuits. Bradley is a degenerate gambler, Lorenzo explained coldly. He owes over $200,000 to the Moretti family, my rivals. A week ago, a mole in my organization leaked a rumor to the Morettis. They told them that Lorenzo Romano had a weakness, a beautiful, brilliant art restorer named Chloe Adams. Chloe felt the blood drain from her face. He knew. The Morettis offered to forgive Bradley's debt if he got close to you, if he earned your trust, brought you back to his apartment, and held you there so they could use you as leverage against me. Lorenzo's jaw clenched, the scar pulling taut against his skin. When my men intercepted the plan this afternoon, I wanted to skin him alive. But I needed to see how far he would go. I needed to be there to ensure not a single hair on your head was harmed. He was trying to kidnap me. Chloe breathed out the reality of the danger crashing over her. The insults, the cruelty. It was all a sick game. He tried to break your spirit before he broke your life, Lorenzo said, his voice dropping to a dangerous rumble. He reached out his knuckles lightly, grazing the exposed skin of her shoulder. Chloe shivered, not from fear, but from the sudden electric jolt of his touch. He called you too big, Lorenzo scoffed, genuine fury lacing his words. A weak, pathetic man, intimidated by a goddess. Look at you, Chloe. His hand slid down, resting firmly on the curve of her waist, his thumb tracing the dip of her hip through the silk. You are lush. You are soft where it matters and strong where it counts. You are a masterpiece that belongs in a museum, not settling for the scraps of mediocre men who want you to shrink to fit their tiny worlds. Tears, hot and fast, finally spilled over Chloe's eyelashes. For years she had fought a war against her own reflection. To hear this powerful, terrifying man speak about her body with such reverence, such absolute devotion, broke a dam inside her. Why me? She sobbed quietly. You could have any woman in the city. Women who look like models. I don't want a model. I don't want an empty shell, Lorenzo said fiercely, wiping her tears away with his thumbs. I want you. Your fire, your talent, your curves. And now that the Morettis know who you are no longer safe in your apartment. The Maybach slowed, passing through massive wrought-iron gates into a sprawling, heavily guarded estate overlooking Lake Michigan. Men with assault rifles patrolled the perimeter. You're staying with me, Lorenzo declared, leaving no room for argument. Here under my protection. You are mine to keep safe, Chloe. And I swear on my life no one will ever make you feel small again. Chloe looked out at the imposing mansion, a golden cage built by a monster who looked at her like she was a saint. She was trapped in the underworld now. Suddenly, before the car even came to a complete stop, a deafening crack shattered the night. The Maybach violently lurched to the side. Get down! Lorenzo roared, throwing his massive body over hers, pinning her to the leather seats as a barrage of automatic gunfire rained down on the reinforced glass of the car. The war for Chloe Adams had just begun. The deafening rattle of automatic gunfire against the Maybach's reinforced armor sounded like 1,000 sledgehammers striking steel. Inside the dark armored cocoon, chaos reigned, but Lorenzo Romano was an anchor of terrifying calm. He had thrown his massive frame completely over Chloe, shielding her soft, trembling body with his own. She could feel the steady, heavy thud of his heart against her back, completely unbothered by the violence erupting outside. "Drive Dominic! Through them!" Lorenzo barked into the intercom, his voice a low, commanding growl that cut through the panic. The driver, Dominic Rossi, didn't hesitate. The Maybach's V12 engine roared like a caged beast, and the heavy vehicle surged forward, slamming violently into the SUV, blocking the estate's secondary gates. Metal-crunched glass shattered, and the barricade vehicle was violently shoved aside. They tore up the winding, cypress-lined driveway, the sounds of Lorenzo's perimeter guards returning fire fading into the distance. When the car finally screeched to a halt beneath the mansion's sprawling portico, Lorenzo waited a fraction of a second to ensure the area was secure before lifting his weight off Chloe. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his hands framing her face. His pitch-black eyes frantically scanned her, searching for any sign of injury. "No." Chloe breathed, her voice shaking uncontrollably. "No, I'm okay, just terrified. They will pay for even bringing fear into your eyes." Lorenzo swore his thumb, brushing a stray tear from her cheek. He helped her out of the ruined vehicle. The Romano estate was a fortress disguised as a palace. Soaring marble columns, Renaissance tapestries, and a sweeping double staircase greeted her. But the beauty was heavily guarded. Men in tactical gear moved with quiet, lethal efficiency through the corridors. Lorenzo handed her off to a stern but kind-eyed older woman named Beatrice. "Prepare the master suite's adjoining room for Miss Adams. Give her whatever she needs. If anyone other than myself or Dominic tries to enter that wing, shoot them." Beatrice nodded curtly, leading a shell-shocked Chloe upstairs. For the next 3 days, Chloe lived inside a gilded, heavily fortified sanctuary. The outside world, her tiny apartment, her demanding boss at the gallery, the humiliating memory of Bradley Hastings, felt like a lifetime ago. Here she was, treated with a deference she had never known. Her closet had been stocked overnight with exquisite custom-made clothing, tailored perfectly to her plus-size frame, flowing silk robes, cashmere sweaters, wide-leg trousers that draped beautifully over her hips. Lorenzo had even arranged for a makeshift restoration studio to be set up in a sunlit corner of the library, complete with the finest imported solvents, horsehair brushes, and raw pigments. Yet Lorenzo himself kept a respectful distance. He was engulfed in a brutal, invisible war with the Moretti family, coordinating strikes from his soundproof office. Chloe saw him only in passing, a dark, brooding spectre, with blood sometimes staining the cuffs of his shirts. But on the 4th night, the silence of her room was broken by a soft knock. Lorenzo stood in the doorway. He looked exhausted. His tie discarded, the top buttons of his shirt undone, to reveal the heavy ink of a syndicate tattoo across his collarbone. "May I come in?" he asked, his voice rough. Chloe, wearing a deep burgundy silk chemise that hugged every curve of her body, nodded. She felt a sudden spike of vulnerability. Without the armor of her daily life, without the layers of oversized sweaters she usually hid beneath, she felt exposed. Lorenzo stepped into the room, locking the heavy oak door behind him. He didn't sit. He just stood there, looking at her with that same intense reverence he had shown in the restaurant. "The war." Chloe started wringing her hands. Is it bad?" "It is handled," Lorenzo replied, dismissively stepping closer. His eyes dropped to the deep V-neck of her chemise, tracing the swell of her breasts, the soft, wide curve of her hips, the thick, powerful shape of her thighs. "I did not come here to speak of the Morettis. I came because I couldn't spend another night under this roof without touching you." Chloe's breath hitched. "Lorenzo, She looked down, old insecurities, flaring up like a sudden fever. "I don't look like the women in your world. I'm heavy. I have stretch marks. You have perfection," Lorenzo interrupted, his voice, a fierce, guttural whisper. He crossed the room in 2 strides, dropping to his knees before her. Chloe gasped as he pressed his face to her stomach, his strong arms wrapping around her waist, burying himself in her softness. It was an act of complete, staggering submission from the most dangerous man in Chicago. "Do not ever insult the woman I love," he murmured against her skin, the heat of his breath sending shivers down her spine. "Do you know what I see when I look at you? Chloe, I see a woman who takes up space in a world that tries to erase her. I see a queen. The women in my world are starving, hollow, and cold. You..." His hands slid up her thick thighs, his thumbs tracing the silvery lines of her stretch marks, as if they were constellations. "You are warmth. You are life. You are a masterpiece, and I am the only man worthy of worshipping at your altar." He stood, pulling her flush against his hard, muscular body. When his lips finally crashed down onto hers, it wasn't tentative. It was acclaiming. The kiss was deep, bruised, and frantic tasting of scotch and unyielding devotion. Chloe melted into him, her hands tangling in his dark hair. For the first time in her 28 years, she didn't suck in her stomach. She didn't try to angle her body to look smaller. She let him feel every inch of her weight, every soft, abundant curve, and in return, Lorenzo devoured her like a starving man who had finally found the feast he was meant for. But the sanctuary was an illusion. The shadows were creeping in, not from the outside, but from within the very walls of the Romano estate. Downstairs in the dimly lit security room, Sullivan Gallagher Lorenzo's oldest friend, and second in command, watched the encrypted surveillance feed. His jaw clenched in disgust. Sullivan was a man built on ruthless efficiency. To him, love was a liability, and a soft, heavy woman who distracted the Don was a death sentence for them all. Sullivan pulled out a burner phone and dialed a scrambled number. "It's Gallagher," Sullivan whispered into the receiver. "The boss is blind. He's risking the entire syndicate for this girl. Tomorrow Lorenzo meets with the Irish unions at the docks. He'll take his top guard. The estate will be on a skeleton crew." A raspy, chilling laugh echoed through the phone. It was Carlo Moretti. "And the girl Sullivan. I'll secure her." Sullivan promised, his eyes narrowing as he looked at the paused frame of Chloe on the monitor. "I'll have her waiting at the extraction point. You take the girl, you end the war, and I take over the Romano syndicate. Do we have a deal?" "Consider it done," Moretti replied. The mole had finally made his move. The next afternoon, the estate was unsettlingly quiet. A heavy storm had rolled in off Lake Michigan, casting the mansion in slate-gray shadows and rattling the towering windows. Lorenzo had left 2 hours prior with a convoy of his best men, his parting kiss still burning on Chloe's lips. He had promised to return by nightfall to finally end the conflict. Chloe was in the library, the scent of turpentine and aged varnish filling the air as she meticulously worked on a damaged 18th century landscape. The delicate, precise work grounded her. It made her feel like herself again. The heavy mahogany doors clicked open. Chloe didn't look up, assuming it was Beatrice bringing her afternoon tea. Leave it on the desk, Beatrice. Thank you, Chloe murmured, swapping a fine-tipped brush for a cotton swab dipped in solvent. Beatrice is indisposed, a cold, masculine voice replied. Chloe spun around. Sullivan Gallagher stood in the doorway. He was a lean, sharp-featured man with pale eyes that held absolutely no warmth. In his hand, he casually held a suppressed Beretta, 9mm, the barrel pointed loosely in her direction. "Sullivan!" Chloe said, her pulse instantly spiking. She carefully set down her tools, her eyes darting to the gun. "Where is Lorenzo?" "Lorenzo is currently walking into a heavily orchestrated meat grinder at the shipyards," Sullivan said smoothly, stepping into the room and locking the door behind him. "And you, Miss Adams, are coming with me. What are you talking about?" Chloe backed up her hip, bumping against the heavy drafting table. "I'm saving this syndicate." Sullivan spat, his composure cracking to reveal deep-seated venom. "Lorenzo used to be a ghost, a machine. Now he's starting wars over a fat civilian art restorer. You've made him soft, Chloe. You're a liability. The Morettis want you, and I am going to hand-deliver you to them to secure my place as the new Don." He raised the gun, aiming it directly at her chest. "Walk now, or I put a bullet in your kneecap and drag you out by your hair." Fear, icy and paralyzing, gripped Chloe's chest. But as she looked at Sullivan at the sneer of disgust on his face, the way he dismissed her as nothing but a heavy, useless burden, a sudden violent spark of rage ignited in her belly. It was the same look Bradley Hastings had given her. It was the look of a man who thought she was weak simply because she was soft. She wasn't going to be a victim again. Not for Bradley, not for Sullivan, and certainly not for the Morettis. "You think I made him soft?" Chloe asked, her voice dropping into a deadly calm that surprised even herself. She subtly shifted her weight, sliding her hand backward across the drafting table. "You think because I'm big, because I'm a civilian, I'm just going to roll over for you?" "I think you're a pig ready for slaughter," Sullivan sneered, taking a step closer. Chloe's fingers wrapped around the heavy glass bottle of industrial-grade chemical solvent, a highly corrosive, blinding stripping agent used for removing centuries of hardened resin. "Wrong!" Chloe snarled, with a sudden explosive burst of speed that Sullivan clearly hadn't expected from a woman her size. Chloe hurled the open bottle directly at his face. The toxic liquid hit Sullivan square in the eyes. He let out a blood-curdling scream, dropping the gun as his hands flew to his burning, blistering face. The gun clattered across the hardwood floor. Chloe didn't hesitate. She lunged forward, her heavy boots stomping down hard on Sullivan's knee. There was a sickening snap, and the traitor crumpled to the floor, howling in agony. Chloe kicked the gun away, her chest heaving adrenaline, flooding her veins like liquid fire. She grabbed a heavy bronze bookend, shaped like a gargoyle from the nearby shelf, raising it high above her head, ready to crush his skull if he tried to stand. Suddenly the library doors didn't just open. They were violently kicked off their hinges, splintering the mahogany wood. Lorenzo stood in the doorway. He was a terrifying vision of carnage. His tailored suit was torn and stained with dark blood. His knuckles were raw, and his eyes were completely demonically black. Behind him stood Dominic and 3 other guards, breathing heavily, their weapons drawn. Lorenzo had realized it was a trap the moment he arrived at the docks. He had slaughtered his way out and driven back like a madman, terrified he was too late. But as Lorenzo took in the scene, Sullivan screaming on the floor, blinded and crippled, and Chloe standing over him like an avenging Valkyrie, her chest heaving, holding a bronze weapon, the terror in his eyes vanished. He didn't see a fragile civilian. He saw a survivor. He saw his equal. "Lorenzo." Chloe gasped, dropping the bookend. It hit the floor with a heavy thud. Lorenzo walked slowly into the room. He didn't even look at Sullivan. He walked straight to Chloe, cupping her face in his blood-stained hands, ignoring the mess. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. "No," she breathed, leaning into his touch, the adrenaline crashing. He tried to take me. To the Morettis. He said I made you weak." Lorenzo finally turned his head to look down at his oldest friend, who was writhing in chemical burns on the expensive rug. "You were wrong, Sullivan," Lorenzo said, his voice dropping to a terrifying, hollow octave. "She doesn't make me weak. She makes me lethal." Lorenzo drew a silver revolver from his shoulder holster. Without looking away from Chloe's eyes, he pointed it downward and pulled the trigger. The gunshot echoed through the library, and Sullivan Gallagher went perfectly still. Lorenzo holstered the weapon, his gaze never leaving Chloe's. "The Morettis at the docks are dead. Carlo Moretti is dead. The war is over, Maya Regina." He pulled her into his chest, burying his face in her hair. She wrapped her arms around his broad back, ignoring the blood, ignoring the violence, knowing only that in his arms, she was the safest, most cherished woman in the world. 6 months later, Laura was closed to the public for a private event. The velvet booths and dim lighting remained, but the atmosphere was entirely different. It was a celebration of power. At the head table sat Lorenzo Romano, the undisputed king of the Chicago underworld, and beside him, wearing a breathtaking custom-made gown of midnight blue silk that accentuated every lush, glorious curve of her body, sat Chloe. She wore a heavy diamond necklace that rested beautifully against her collarbone. When Lorenzo looked at her, the entire room ceased to exist. She was no longer just the art restorer. She was the donor, a woman who had walked through fire and blood, who had learned that her size wasn't a flaw to be hidden, but a testament to her presence, her power, and her undeniable perfection. Bradley Hastings was nowhere to be found, a forgotten ghost in a city now ruled by the woman he had once tried to make feel small, because Chloe Adams was finally taking up exactly as much space as she deserved. Chloe's journey from a humiliating blind date to the fiercely protected queen of the Romano Syndicate proves that true power comes from embracing exactly who you are. She didn't have to shrink to find a man who worshipped her. She just had to find the one strong enough to hold her. If you loved this intense, pulse-pounding Mafia romance, hit that like button, share this story with your friends, and subscribe for more thrilling, dramatic tales.